is Much Wenlock in Shropshire. Typical little peaceful English backwater. 1500 years ago, it was next to nothing. But 500 years later, it was a big, bustling medieval market town. How come? Was it swept along in some really interesting major historical events, do you think? Or was it just slowly changed by the old forces of economics? Maybe it was adopted by some historical figure who just liked the place and wanted to tart it up a bit. Time Team is in Much Wenlock this week because we got a letter from Mr. Jerry Bowden. Maybe his request will unlock some answers, because there must have been scores of little settlements dotted around here in the Dark Ages. So what was so special about this place?
Dear Mick and Time Team, recently, when lowering our area of our garden, we found signs of old foundations. The local archaeologist, Dr. Horton, considers these may be the remains of one of the first houses to be built in the town. Is he right? And just how did Much Wenlock grow to be the busy place it is today?
This week's Time Team are Mick Aston, Bristol University Field Archaeologist; Carenza Lewis, Royal Commission for Historic Monuments; Phil Harding, Wessex Archaeological Trust Field Archaeologist; Jerry Barber, Bristol University Environmental Archaeologist; Robin Bush, Archivist; and Victor Ambrose, Historical Illustrator. Right, Mr. Bowden's got these old foundations, and he thinks they go right back to the beginning of Much Wenlock. How do we find out what they actually are?
Well, the first thing was we'll go around and have a look. I want to have a chat with Mr. Bowden, I think. It's a splendid letter. Lots of useful information in it. I was particularly interested in the bit about going back to the beginnings of Much Wenlock. I mean, that's obviously something else we've got to look at while we're looking at the building.
I'd like to have a look at some of the other earlier maps, try and work out the layout of early Much Wenlock, and then go and have a walk around the town to see if anything we can see out there fits in with the maps at all.
What about Phil? What are you going to do?
Well, I've been looking at this map with Robin, and we think there's a possibility of getting some interesting results if we could put a trench across this boundary. I don't know if you know the local people in Much Wenlock, what the chances are of being able to get a trench put somewhere along there. Well, permission is the big thing.
I've got some permissions.
You have?
Yeah, we'll see what we can do.
Well, I'd be quite happy to get started then, Mick.
Well, I think you and I can go off and have a look at the site.
Hang on, in addition, we've got all these letters from local people who want a variety of problems solved. So between doing your main tasks, if you could have a look at these and see if there's anything you can come up with.
Yeah, I was reading one of these. It's quite interesting. It's from the Abbey. They found some interesting bones there that they'd like identifying, so I think I might go down there and have a look at them.
Right. Well, I'll go and draw some Saxon natives, shall I?
Keeps him out of mischief.
It's 10 to 3 now on Friday. By 6:30 on Sunday, you've got to do a presentation to the local people of Much Wenlock, including all the local bigwigs, so you can have your hair permed before then.
I'd rather not.
OK, let's get started.
That's great. Right.
Much Wenlock is situated in Shropshire, close to the Welsh border, approximately 12 miles from Shrewsbury. There's been a settlement here since 200 AD, enjoying the protection of the surrounding hills, which form a defensive ridge around the town. It's been an important religious site since the 7th century, and to date, archaeological research has centred on the remains of the Norman priory, with relatively little work being done into the development of the town.
Hello, Mr. Bowden.
Jerry Bowden.
Hello, my name's Mick Aston from the Time Team, and this is Phil Harding, who's the other thing. We've just been looking at your letter.
Oh, yes.
And we thought we'd come and have a chat with you and see if we can help you at all, whether we can do anything.
All ready and waiting. If you want to have a go, it's
Great.
there.
I can have a look at it.
I'll just put my shoes on.
Okay, lovely, thanks. Shall we go around the back?
Yes,
and
if you go down the back there, and I'll show you where you come out of the house.
That's
and
great.
where I found it down the garden.
Lovely
job.
Okay, well, we'll see you in a minute then. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tart.
I'm looking for sort of charismatic local personalities who might have affected the early history of this place.
Well, the obvious one is St Milburga, who was the first abbess of the Abbey here, late 7th, early 8th century. and apparently after death her body smelt of fragrant balsam. Good for virgins, Much Wenlock, quite clearly. And the other character, probably Roger. Roger of Montgomery, the first Earl of Shrewsbury, who owned Much Wenlock immediately after the Norman conquest, and may very well have been responsible for establishing some of the boundaries around Much Wenlock, which we're investigating this weekend.
Got anything I can read?
You can try that one.
OK. Cheers.
Can you point out to us then, Jerry, where the things were that you found?
The foundation comes somewhere where that is there.
Yeah.
There's the cottages there, and the foundation is slightly on the squiff, and it comes through somewhere.
It's basically where that brickwork is it?
Down under there. And then when we were...
What, it's going this way, is it?
It's going that way, and when we dug that area down there, just a little to the left of that step,
Yeah.
we hit another pile of masonry. And when you stand down there and line it, it lines right through.
Comes back to there.
And it ends right under the dripstone. But there's quite a large chunk of masonry there.
Yeah.
And we just went round it.
Yeah.
We left it alone.
I mean, what sort of size was it?
Oh no, well, let's put it this way, we put the pick in it and decided to leave well alone.
Yeah. So what, a metre across or whatever?
Yeah, it was a lump.
And how far down was it?
It's about a foot up above the actual sunken area down there.
Right. Oh, so not very far down then.
No. We'll probably ought to go down a bit somewhere in here if there is something.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll do what we can, and then Sunday night we'll also need to go next door if we can.
Mr. Laws, is it?
Mr. Law's a little bit higher up, yes.
Okay, well, we'll come back and see you later in the week, but thanks very much anyway.
Okay,
We'll
see you again.
see what we can find out for you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye then. Hi, excuse me to bother you. You Mr. Laws?
Yes, I am.
I'm Phil Harding from the Time team.
Hello.
We're led to understand that you might be possible to dig a small trench in your...
I don't see why not, yes.
Well, we're very grateful.
We can see we've got the three perhaps main streets today here. But I think if you look closely, with the stream which comes up through here, there's no sign of it along this road now, but of course we could see it on the earlier map. And the possible earlier line of the road coming across here. It would be interesting to know what the evidence for Saxon settlement in this area at the junction between this road and the stream was.
And the area of Holy Trinity Church, in fact, just
Quite
there.
where the church is, which appears to be the earliest focus of settlement. And of course it's particularly interesting to notice that Jerry Bowden, who started this whole thing off, his house is just here, which is right at the crossroads between the Ship Brook, running here, and this earlier possible line of the street running through the town. So he's really right in the middle of things in this house here.
Right.
What's going on?
Well, we've had a word with Jerry Bowden, and there's a wall, he says, coming across here, which they found when they were doing this garden here.
Yeah.
And he says all sorts of interesting stuff with the building next door. And so, I mean, I'm loath to dig the chap's garden up to start with. But although there's lots of clay pipe and things, I think if we get the ground radar chaps to do the whole of this area, and then, you know, see if we can see this wall, see if we can see any other structures, and then we can perhaps get some diggers in and have a go at it. Hello, Ollie.
How you doing, mate?
Right, not too bad, mate. Think you can do this whole area and tell us what's going on?
Yeah,
If we can pick up Jerry's wall, then we can then get the chaps to come in and cut some trenches and do an excavation.
No, there won't be any trouble.
Okay, that's great.
If it's down there, we'll find it, I should think.
So work begins. Mr. Laws has given permission for a small trench to be dug in his garden. This will allow Phil to look for an earlier boundary wall or ditch underneath or close to the present wall. Will he be able to confirm that these properties stand on the site of some of the oldest parts of the town? Ollie starts the radar work on Mr. Bowden's garden, and the roof line, pointed out by Jerry on the house next door, has prompted Mick to investigate further.
Hello, we're from the Time team. My name's Mick Aston, this is Tony Robinson.
Hello.
And we're looking in Jerry Bowden's garden next door. We've got the ground radar on there, and obviously your building's old as well. I just wonder if we could come in and have a look and see if it might help us to understand what's going on next door.
Please do.
This is just the sort of thing we're looking for, look. I mean, it looks as if it might be 15th century, something like that.
Right.
And what we should do is get the building surveyed. That's the first thing, so we know where it fits into the plan. And then, if you were agreeable to this, we could actually get a dendro date out of this.
That's fine.
I mean, we've actually got the sapwood at the top here, So we could presumably go from the date that the tree was felled and work out how old this was and get a date for the felling year, and that would tell us more or less the date it was put up.
Is there any local history about what this actually is?
A lady in the almshouses in the 90s said it was known locally as the whipping post.
Oh, crikey.
Whipping post.
That'll suit you. Have you got anything else in the house that's not necessarily wood but stone or anything like that also might give us a clue like that?
We've got some arches in the living room.
Have you?
Some stone
could we have a
ones.
look at those? Because they may
Yes.
help
Which way?
us as well.
Through the dining room into the lounge.
So you really don't mind us drilling a hole in that and filling it up? It really won't
Hang on,
show
mate.
at all.
No,
was
not
it?
at all, no.
Oh, crikey. That's good, isn't it? Oh, right.
Ah, look!
Ah, yes. Oh, that's great. That's great. Yes, that's another good clue, actually, because this must be medieval. What it looks like, actually, is the two doorways into the service end of a medieval house, so that you've got one entry into the pantry or buttery and the other one into the food stores, basically. The pantry for the dry food and the buttery for the barrels, not the butter, but the barrels, the butts,
So you've got loads of servants going in this one with
and
stuff.
there ought to be a screens passage
Coming out of this one.
across the front here, right, through somewhere across here. I mean, I think this bears out that we need to have a plan made of the house, really, in relation to Jerry's next door, and then we'll perhaps see where this fits in, because this looks in situ to me. It doesn't look as if it's... often people say they've been bought in from the Abbey or whatever.
Yeah.
And clearly, with a big Abbey outside, it's an obvious thing to suggest, but that looks genuine to me. That looks as if it's in the right place.
Can you tell anything about what sort of age it might be?
Well, the
Just looking
arches
at
are a
it.
bit flat, so I'd have thought it was probably, getting towards the end of the Middle Ages, perhaps 15th century. But again, the post might help us, which must be the other side of the wall here. That will help to tie that in. And then, of course, whatever they're finding outside will help.
So the radar scan should help the diggers to position their trench in the best possible place. Phil is carefully working his way deeper. What he needs to find with his early boundary wall is a bit of pottery, which would give it a date. Jerry is following up one of the other letters from Louis de Vet, who lives at Wenlock Abbey. Some animal bones have been found under the Abbey floor, and he'd like them identified. The kind of stuff that we find in houses like that, does it have any significance outside of the house itself?
Yeah, because what we've seen is a very good example of the sort of thing you get in almost every historic town. Almost everywhere you go, there are bits of earlier buildings behind later frontages, under later roofs and so on.
Yeah.
And they are the clue as to where the town develops. And you could find that in almost every town. I mean, what we really need to do is to get up on that tower and have a good look over the town, because that will give us some idea of the overall plan, whether it was a planned town or whatever. How do you fancy the climb?
Yeah.
Let's go for it.
Come on.
So we're looking down Shinton Street here, and of course the one that we were looking at, you can see people in the garden where the ranging rods are, and you can see parts of that house that we were in earlier, and then just over to the right of that, where Phil's actually looking at that back boundary, that wall, which ought to be the back of the original block of properties going off from the church in that direction. And obviously if they get anything under that wall, we shall know roughly when that was laid out.
You can see from here that the Abbey is actually stuck outside the town, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's the other way round, actually. The Abbey is founded, and we shall learn some details of that later on, and then the town develops outside the gates, because an abbey was full of, obviously, monks, or sometimes nuns, but monks in this case, who would have needed lots of services. So very quickly, a market might have grown up at the gates.
So, yeah, is that the gates?
I think this tower here is probably the gates. Again, we'll check
So you
that.
just get an itinerant cobbler and a bloke who flogged pans or something outside for a few years.
And they get to know there's a sense of trade there.
Yeah.
There's some people who need their services. And very often a town develops from a market. And a market develops because people have got used to going there and trading anyway. So, it can be sort of follow on, a gradual process, really. There are cases where towns are deliberately established, deliberately planted down in the landscape. But often, many of them must have been a sort of fixing of some arrangement that had gone on anyway earlier.
It's amazing, isn't it, how clear the differentiation is between the end of the town gardens and the beginning of the fields.
You know why that is. It's because of the difference in ownership. You know, a boundary is fixed with an owner on each side. And really that can't be altered until somebody owns both sides. And if that never happens, then that boundary remains.
So that's why we're investigating by the side of that wall, because that wall or something like it could have been there since the Dark Ages.
It could have been there since the town was founded. Yeah. Very often, and this is a very good example, the oldest things in the town are not the buildings or the church or any of the other things that you think are obvious. They're actually the lines that were drawn on the ground by the original guy laying the place out. I think that's fantastic that a line can remain that long. The first letter that we looked at was about this one plot with this one building on this one plot. And I think, you know, ultimately we've got to try and tell Jerry Bowden where that fits in. And I mean, if it fits in on an original town plot as part of a sort of planted set of town properties outside the Abbey gate in the 12th century, something like that. I mean, that would answer his letter, which will mean that we will be looking at the new Norman town, if you're right about the date, and the buildings in it, of which this one is left that we've been in today, and whatever's found in terms of the excavation of both the back garden and the wall. That's the central part of the story.
We're looking at the transition between Wilburger and Roger of Montgomery, if you like.
It's when it becomes a town, a medieval or Norman new town, as opposed to whatever went before. I think that's the main thing we're going to have to concentrate on.
So, end of day 1, 36 hours to go. Tomorrow, the radar results should be ready and the dig in Jerry Bowden's garden can begin. We should also be able to make a start on getting a date for the Samson post in the Gibson's kitchen. See you after the break. Day 2, 10 past 8 in the morning. And I've found my charismatic historical figure already. Roger of Montgomery, kind of cross between Norman Schwarzkopf and Billy Graham. He'd flatten his enemies, but he was going to make pretty damn sure there was a place laid up in heaven for him as well. He was the half-brother of William the Conqueror, and William had given him the whole of this part of Shropshire to make sure that the Welsh didn't come charging over the border. And he was all-powerful here. He could do anything he liked. He could even flatten the whole place if he wanted to and turn it into some huge deer park. That's the kind of thing that he did elsewhere. But he didn't do that here. Imagine, this had been a religious site since time immemorial. And he got rid of the old Anglo-Saxon abbey and he built this massive new priory so that the Almighty would realise what a decent bloke that he was. But this was going to be a really special priory. He brought over 12 sophisticated French monks from the abbey at Cluny with long, floppy continental sleeves and first-class wine cellars. This was going to be a class act in the middle of dreary old Shropshire. And outside the priory gates, he got rid of all the old hovels and built lovely new houses, lovely straight streets, a big new church for everyone to worship in. But he didn't want the townspeople poking their noses into his lovely new priory, so he built this massive 20-foot-high wall all the way around it. If you can imagine, there would have been all the noise and the bustle of Wenlock New Town on one side, and on the other side, the quiet and the meditation and the French psalm singing of his Cluniac monks. Well, that's what I think anyway. I wonder if archaeological research will bear me out.
Blimey. I thought we owed you an explanation for why we were digging big holes in your garden. And the reason for that is that we've got the radar, and there's various walls across here and probably big posts and so on over here. Yeah. So we thought we'd put a trench in like this to try and pick those up, because the radar sort of pretty well
that line through as we had before.
That's the wall coming through, and that
yeah.
shows up on a section cutting across there. You can see the line
Division
across
wall,
there.
yeah.
So, I mean, it looks a bit of a mess, and you won't be getting any potatoes in for a while. But
I say they'll struggle a bit at that depth.
Yeah, but,
So what have you got down there?
Well, I think we got 3 things to dig. There's this thing that I'm standing in here now, very dark patch with
I see, yes.
bricks and what have you in it. With a nice edge to it along there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, obviously, another edge there.
You got no dating material out of it yet?
Only from what we got at the top, and all that is very, very late post-medieval material, no question about that. And what we'd obviously hope is that eventually, as we get down into it, then obviously the material will get earlier. That's what we'd hope.
what they've got here is a mass of signals down this end, which means that they're suggesting probably a wall with posts inside it, yes. Which, well, I suppose it might be an aisled hall. That is, it might be a building rather like a church, you know, the central area with aisles down the side.
Support the roof line.
That's right, and then the 2 aisles at the side, of which this would be an aisle then, about 2 metres across. So clearly there's something here, and it could be a very big and important site. Although what it's doing here, and quite what date it is,
you don't know yet.
We don't really know, but
no, not yet.
You know, obviously if we carry on down, we shall get more out of that.
Good.
Then while we're here, we've got Mark, who you know,
the man who caused all the problems.
Man who started it all, and he's got some interesting theories, and since he lives there, it'd be worth perhaps explaining that to us. Can you do that?
I don't. You know, Jerry, how whenever you get your JCB out, I follow you down the street, worried that you're going to dig another hole. And I've been watching it for about 5 years, and I've got this map of Much Wenlock, and have tried to develop a hypothesis of how it all develops. You see.
Well, it's nicely coloured, anyway.
The green represents the boundary of the Anglo-Saxon monastery. Basically, the Anglo-Saxon monks lived in here.
This is normal to have a sort of embanked enclosure in which all the buildings are scattered about inside.
That's the Schulte Brook down there.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the shipbook there, and this is coming out of Milberger's well here.
Yeah.
And then when the Normans come along, they then divide it into 2. So you've got this precinct wall placed, and the Anglo-Saxon part of the monastery is then given over to the town like that. And that's now Holy Trinity Church, and that became the town's church.
Ah, right.
While the monastic buildings up this end, they then converted to their Cluniac monastery.
This is before the present buildings are built, then?
Absolutely.
Right.
And they divide it off with a property boundary along here. And what is interesting is this property boundary aligns absolutely precisely with your back fence over there.
Well,
we're digging there at the moment, just at that point there. Right. So that the chronology of this would suggest that the division of the larger Anglo-Saxon precinct into the smaller Norman precinct is the same date as the laying out of your
And
plot.
what sort of date are you thinking of for that?
This must be 1080 when the monastery is founded. Right. Now you are significantly right at the bottom of this boundary, and that would suggest that this building is fronting a great open space in front of the Abbey gate. One inevitably thinks that that's then going to be the market.
The marketplace.
Indeed, it survives today. It's called the Bull Ring, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
And all these little houses out here are infill into the Bull Ring, which would have been a great space. So your structure, if it's a great hall, is there fronting this great marketplace that would have been open from here to the Abbey Precinct Hall.
And here is the market as it exists in Much Wenlock today. It's now held on the other side of the church under the Guild Hall. Upstairs in the incident room, Jerry is busy analysing the animal bones found at the Abbey. Louis de Vet will be interested to learn that these aren't fish bones, but pig and piglet bones, which it seems would have formed a significant part of the monk's staple diet. Victor is working on a reconstruction of how the town would have looked in the earliest days of Norman occupation. Here, you can see his impression of the marketplace.
Coming along view down Shinton Street, we can see the rather larger plots on the left-hand side. We should be able to see Phil digging with the big yellow machine down there. This prominent boundary along the back with the countryside on one side and the town on the other side. You can see the relationship of the priory and the precinct to the town very clearly from this view as well. We can see the way the parish church is off on one side, fronting onto what would have been the marketplace right next to it. And of course the work that we're doing on Jerry's house is right next to that. We're looking right down now on the excavation, over his new patio and so on in his garden there. Now what we're suggesting now is that all of the ground next to his house, that is towards the church, is actually the old marketplace that's been infilled with later properties. And so there's a rather less regular group of properties between the church and Jerry's house.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit into quite the same pattern as the others. And somewhere through there must have gone the original course of the Shitbrook, because it's coming down from this side of the town that we're over now, through down that sort of rather irregular line of probably the early street and the early stream, probably the same line, and then going out past the church and down past the later monastic buildings into the fish pond. It's the only thing that doesn't really fit into this nice uniform plan with these blocks of properties that were laid out in the Norman town. So it probably reflects either the pre-town village or the pre-town farmsteads of the peasants, or the stream, or both. Perhaps they were built along the stream. We'd expect that, get your water out of the stream then.
You wanted to know about the documents that we got with regard to the origins and growth of Much Wenlock as a town.
Anything you've got?
That's right. Well, the Domesday Book, which is here, talks about 46 bordars. Well, the number of borders you get elsewhere is quite small, but here you've got quite a lot of them, 46. Maybe a town is beginning to start on a kind of unofficial basis.
This is unusual for this part of the country.
Certainly for this area, yeah. Mm-hmm. Then you get this, which is a charter of King Stephen in 1139, granting them a 3-day fair. Certainly, by this time, you can assume they've probably got a market, and this is a fair to top it up a bit.
What's the population in Domesday? Does it say anything how many people might have been living here?
Well, I mean, if you take 46 as the people who are living in the towns and multiply that by, 4 or 5, you're around about the 200 mark.
Right, so not a tiny settlement.
Oh, no,
Nothing
that's significant.
Yes.
Then this, the original of which is in the British Library in London, is an incredible account of the customs of the borough, for the first time, the borough of Much Wenlock.
This is the first specific reference to a borough,
That's
it?
it.
First time we really know it's a town.
Yeah,
Right.
and at that time we know there were 8 freemen and 39, this is the crucial thing, 39 burgesses.
Burgesses, right, yes.
As well as what they call villani, who are probably the farmers out in the countryside.
Right.
So there's your 3 crucial dates, 1086, 1139 and 1247.
How are you doing then, Dan? Are you going to be able to get anything out of it, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like we've got Heartwood-Sapwood boundary here.
Yeah, I thought when I looked at that yesterday, that was probably more or less the outside of the tree, and that you could probably do something with that.
And then here, might be complete sapwood, but I think it's probably only the Heartwood-Sapwood boundary again. But we'll try both, one there and one there.
So what, you're going to drill in there through the rings of the tree?
Yeah, we'll go in like that.
Yeah.
Straight through to the centre of the tree.
So you reckon you might get enough rings going right the way through to be able to count up to get the day to the post through,
go up
through
to the
top
centre
there?
of the tree.
Yeah.
Obliquely, and we have quite a few rings here, so it looks promising anyhow.
That's good. How you getting on then, Paul?
Pardon?
How you getting on then?
Oh,
What are you getting?
very interesting.
Looks a lot of activity since this morning, anyway.
Indeed. I think the main thing, Nick, is that over in the far side of the trench, what we initially
thought was perhaps a fairly late 18th, 19th century yard surface.
There was all that cobbles were showing up.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, we've given them a really good clean over there. Yeah. Much better surface than initially appeared.
Right.
And we're starting to get small pieces of medieval pottery turning up in and around them.
Yeah,
so it appears to be several hundred years earlier than we first thought. So work's going on to clean that up, see if we've got any edges to the floor and so forth. In this part of the trench, again, things are starting to get very interesting and we're getting into the real archaeology.
Was this was where we were suggesting there might be the wall, wasn't it? Across. It doesn't look very wall-like at the moment.
Well, many things can happen to a wall.
Yes.
You don't leave good stone in the ground if you demolish a building, do you? You dig it out.
So it might be robbed out. You might be looking at where the wall has been, in fact.
That's right. And we're just starting to look here. And we've got brown earth with big rocks, rubble.
Yeah.
And as we remove these, we suddenly get great holes, look, under them. Like I get my hand in under that.
Right, so it's like as if it's fell back in the hole.
People have just chucked it straight back in the hole. It's a very loose fill indeed.
Right. What happened about this aisle post then, Paul? Because you've got a bit of it showing, but there was some idea of opening more of it up.
Yeah, well, let's go and have a look, shall we, Mick?
Yeah, OK.
We seem to be coming round there. We'd expect this to be a circular foundation, perhaps 3 feet across.
Yeah.
We can't tell from this. So we're opening out a box just there to see more of this. This should actually give us, if it is circular, the semicircle of the foundation just
so really
there.
we've got to come back when you've cleared this out and see if that stone packing goes on round.
But at the moment, as you can see, it is looking...
It's looking like it, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Yeah. Do you need some early pottery, don't you?
We do, really.
In the right place, in amongst the stones or whatever.
Yeah.
So Dan has got his wood samples from the Samson post in the Gibson's kitchen and has even managed to find somewhere to sand them down. He does this so that he can count the rings on the wood. Now it's a question of cross-referencing this sample with the others stored on the computer.
In that 1247 document, we've got a reference to these 8 freemen. And obviously, it'd be nice to try and locate the 8 plots that they held.
Actually, that's quite nice. That fits quite well up here. I think you could probably count out 8 plots coming along here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, perhaps, going up in that block. And that fits in quite nicely with what seems to be coming out of the analysis of the plan of the village. So it seems perhaps got an early nucleus around here, around the church. You've then got this nice planned Burgess town, proto-town development along Shinton Street that probably dates to 1100, something like that, perhaps.
Well,
it's in existence by then. Perhaps.
Supposing that they were re-establishing the priory and maximising its income from endowment by founding this borough and building these burgage plots. Yeah.
So they've built it sort of on the edge here, this boundary that runs down here, dividing off the church and the settlement from the priory. In the rebuild, you say they're trying to sort of found these burgesses to stimulate the town into a bit of renewed activity.
Absolutely.
Well, in that case, yes, you'd have these sort of founded along here. On this sort of new land, newly planned, away from the already occupied area, probably a bit grubby, a bit muddy, nice new settlement, new town, laid out, encouraging people to come and live there and to increase the prosperity of the town.
Dan, can you hear me? It's Tony. Over.
Hello, yes?
Can you give us a dendro date yet?
No, not yet. We've processed 2 cores now and I'm running the first one through the computer. But we'll have something for you hopefully tomorrow morning.
OK, thanks, mate. Over and out.
Over and out.
Oh, we can live with that until tomorrow morning, can't we?
Yeah. Suspense.
Yeah.
So what else do we do tomorrow?
Well, I think as far as Jerry Bowden's building's concerned, we've just got to crash on with the excavation there. I mean, I was around there this afternoon. We've clearly got a robber trench where there might have been the wall, and they were busy exposing a larger area of the aisle post. We've got to get that done because if it is an aisled hall, it's good. It's unusual. There's not that many of them. Yeah. It's an important building. And I think we've just got to give the digging team time to get on with that.
Are you going to be able to dig down deep enough by tomorrow at 6:30 to give the people at our presentation a realistic picture of what was down there?
I would like to think so.
I mean, I can't sit here and say definitely.
Archaeologists will never say yes.
No,
I would like to
you're
think so. It's
right.
like you say to me, oh, there's a feature down this train. What? A feature is anything. You look around this room, it's full of features.
I will go as deep as I can go.
Yeah, it's the same problem as here, though, isn't it, Phil?
that is within a day.
Yeah.
It's going to take me to a point where I'm going to get all the answers. Because if I have to bring in shoring, it's going to take longer to put the
If
shoring
you go
in.
above a certain depth, you see, you've got to have it shored because
Otherwise
it
it could collapse.
I think we've got a lot to do tomorrow. I would suggest one more glass of wine and then a very early night, especially for Phil, who's got a lot of features to look at tomorrow.
I have.
Cheers. If we run a tape down from their house 60 feet and we're nowhere near the excavation, which I don't think we will be, because if you think there's their yard, isn't there? And then I wouldn't have thought we're anywhere near that. In any case, we ought to be in the Gibson's garden rather than next door. Yeah, I've sketched it out here. Look, if you've got let's say it's like the Hereford one. This is all getting very complicated now, Victor. We'll have to
keep that bit in the back.
keep that. Well, there's the.
This is day 3, by the way, and the weather's gone lousy again. And when I went home last night, I thought that what we'd got was an aisled hall. But now everyone's saying that was hypothesis 1, and like all hypothesis 1s, it's just a load of old rubbish.
You're learning.
Apparently, now what we've got is a dead dog and a medieval outside toilet.
No, look.
That's what you told me.
No, look. If we take the back of the house, that's the house we've got it with the raggle on the back. We've been expecting this wall to come out in this sort of direction off this wall, but because of this angle, in fact, it's more likely to come off more or less like that.
Yes.
Which would be underneath more or less where the fence is and the daffodils and the flower beds and all the rest of it. And of course we're a long way from the excavation, which is somewhere over here.
You thought that might be an outbuilding, like a kitchen or a store or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with a building like this, whatever is going on inside, there are going to be all sorts of structures on the outside. There are going to be cobbled yards, there's going to be detached kitchens and so on. So there's plenty of opportunity for other structures to turn up.
Hiya. Happy Easter.
Excuse me, but the turkey's not quite finished yet.
I'm ever so sorry about this, but you're not going to believe this.
No, I'm not.
No, can we just measure down your garden and then I'll tell you what it's all about? Right, go on, off you go down with the tape and look for something like 50 to 60 feet.
We have something to tell you.
Yeah, we've got some. We've been thinking, and which is always a bad thing.
Oh, it
right?
is, that's
especially this time in the morning. Where are you there now?
But that's 20 there.
Is it? Turn it over because it's metric on one side and feet on the other.
Yeah, 65 foot 7.
Come back 5 feet. It's important. We don't want any more. We don't want any more feet than we can cope with.
Right.
Where are we in relation to the?
About a yard in.
Great. We missed it. Right. Let's get the drawing out.
It's been a long building, wouldn't it? So what you're saying is that if there's the 2 arches that we know about in the lounge there, then probably there's another 2 arches somewhere behind the stucco in the kitchen.
You've got both sides there. You've got to imagine it coming back down this way. Yeah. I think this might even be too big.
It looks... I don't understand why we didn't realise it before. I mean, if you have a look, Mick, I mean, you can see higher, you can see the side of what is obviously a roof there, can't you?
And there's supposed to be one on the other side on the drawing.
So why did we think it was next door?
Well, I think until we went into this house, you know, which we did the other day, and found the post and found the arches, we didn't actually realise that wasn't perhaps something late medieval, something just sort of tacked on to another building. And after all, it was Jerry that wrote us the letter with what was in his garden, with the foundations he'd found, not the Gibsons. So because obviously all this has been laid and they haven't touched it for a long time.
I still can't see where the other one is.
Yeah, here, look. See, there's 3 stones down
of course,
right of the window.
Yes. Do you see that?
But you see, you'd have
Just
to get
above
right
the
in this
level
corner of the
of the
garden to see that.
Conservatory roof. There's a line down there, which is the other side, presumably, of the roof of the Great Hall.
Yep.
Exciting, isn't it?
We haven't quite got the dendro date sorted out for the post yet, but there's a suggestion it might be 13th century.
Gosh, really?
Right, that's Henry III, Edward the First time, you know. And what we think we've got, that's the drawing that you'll know of the end of your building. What that, if it's an old hall, which a thing like that with the general layout I think has got to be, we've got a sort of series of parallels, of which I suppose the most useful one is Hereford. The Bishop of Hereford has got a palace next to the cathedral, and he's got an aisled hall there of about 1160, and it's like a church. It's got aisle posts down the side of it.
What are you trying to tell me? You're going to dig up the flowers?
No, I wasn't going to suggest
just softening you up.
Yes, I was.
I mean, what it means is here's the back of your house, right, and you've got the two arches in there, right, and the ends of your raggle on the roof are like that. If we take 60 feet out, just to be like that, the Hereford one, and we take put two aisle posts in, we end up with an aisle hall, which is basically under your patio and your conservatory and the extension and the flower beds, right?
And what sort of stuff would have gone on in this aisle?
This is it's a great feasting hall. It's where well, we'll come to the context of it in a minute, but it's an eating place. It's a social place, and what we've done, of course, is dig a hole about here, right? Because Jerry asked us to find this wall, which comes off the back of his house there, which is his house is you know from that
section here.
Yeah. So there's his bit of wall there.
That'd be the wattle and daub he found at some
That's probably
Would have
part
been
of
the
something,
extension
yeah.
into
And then
here.
your post is in here, you see, and you know there was probably a building something like that along the front. There may have been another post, crosswing like that. There may even have been two more doorways, like in your living room, in this wall over here, which would be about where we are now, or possibly a bit further back. But there's no sign of it, and we wouldn't want to take your kitchen apart anyway, if you'd let us, if we got time, right? But it does mean that the important building is not in Jerry's garden; it's in yours.
Oh right, that's surprising.
And the context of it, we think at the moment, because there's various documentary bits, there are 8 plots laid out here, of which we can only account for 7, which rather suggests that the prior of the monastery is keeping one back for himself. The most likely reason he'd do that is to keep one up against the marketplace and perhaps for a guest hall. So I've just suggested that this actually might be the prior's guest hall for his high-class visitors. Very appropriate for your visitors today,
that's
you
right.
see.
That's what my father said when he said to my husband, keep her in the manner to which she wants to become
That's
a
right.
customer.
Well, there you are, living in a baronial hall now, one end of a baronial hall. Cool, that looks pretty gluey.
What we've clearly got here is a major structural problem at some stage in the past.
Yeah.
Because what we're standing in is the infilled remains of a very large pit of some description, perhaps a well.
Yeah.
You can see the edge of it swinging round, and it's cut through all the early archaeology.
Yeah.
And after it's gone out of use, they've filled it up with some very loose clay and rubble and soil and so forth. And they think they've cracked the problem, and they've laid a nice cobbled floor or yard over the whole thing. But as you can see, there's been a drastic subsidence problem, and the whole thing has slumped down into the middle of the pit. We're still not quite sure about the dating of the various things. We're getting medieval pottery off this floor, so at the moment it does look medieval. Clearly the feature I'm standing in, this perhaps possible well, is earlier than that. And this itself, the material it's cut through, it's not cut through natural clay, it's cut through more archaeology, very sessy looking clay, dumped sewage perhaps or
It
something.
doesn't actually look as if you've got anything to do with a big hall, which we've just been revising our ideas about. We've brought Bob along with us, who did the radar of this area. I mean, it doesn't seem to me to Bob to tie up with, you know, what was on the radar, what's coming out of the ground. Is it just that I don't understand the radar?
It's really the confusing issue is the masses of regular stones.
Right.
They appear on the transect to be wall-like, especially down here.
Yeah.
There was a linear sort of ridge of stones, so it could just as easily have been a foundation for a wall.
So it was probably picking up all this cobble area
It
as
picked
well.
up the well.
Is that the dead dog that they were telling me about?
That is indeed the dead dog just there. He's actually in this black layer, which is where we found all the clay pipe and the 19th century pottery, so he's a 19th century or later dead dog.
Time's really speeding on now. About 2 hours before the presentation, and the key piece of evidence which we haven't yet got is the dating of the wood of the Gibson Sampson post. Do you think you'll get it in time?
Well, we hope so. I want to be absolutely certain before releasing a date, and I want to just process a couple more samples and then finish them off, then have a look at the printout, and if it is convincing, then we can say yes, it is a date, but it'd be a mistake to release anything before then.
Sure. This is the kind of printout that we're talking about. Now, as I understand it, and if I say back to you what you've just said to me, you correct me where I'm wrong, these are lists of tree samples from all over the country, different places all over the country, dating from 950 AD here down to 1949 here. And you compare the sample that you've drilled with all these different samples here on the computer, and only one match can be right because the tree can only have been chopped down in 1 year. So as soon as you've got the evidence that that corresponds, you know roughly how old the tree is. So there's actually a more accurate process even than carbon dating.
Oh yes, carbon dating in relation to this is a waste of time. This is precise. We can get it to sometimes the season of the year if we have the complete sapwood.
It's great, isn't it? Well, I shouldn't interrupt you anymore because we really kind of need that evidence. The weather's let us down again, but fortunately the archaeology is going quite well. At the Gibsons' house, Mick has found evidence of the other two doorways to the aisled hall. Is it too fanciful to say that that looks like?
It's possible, but I think it's been so hacked about later on that you couldn't really be sure of that. That's, but I think that's what that is now, isn't it? For one.
So these doorways, which Mick can now draw onto his plan, would have been identical to those which can still be seen in the Gibsons' lounge. At the boundary site, further work has revealed how the wall has indeed been built over a medieval ditch. But better than that, Phil has found some 12th century pottery which proves that this boundary is one of the earliest in the town. The aisled hall and that boundary line fit into a picture of a developing town like this, with a community focused around the river and the church, close to the gates of the new Cluniac Priory. Time's just about up, but what we're still waiting for is a dendro date for the aisled hall, which will hopefully prove that it was part of the same development. First of all, thank you, everybody, for giving us such a fantastic weekend, despite the absolutely appalling weather. And we must tell you that the archaeological evidence that we discovered was absolutely fantastic. Everywhere we turned, there was more. And the other Time to answer Jerry's original questions. What can we tell him? Well, his garden contains the remains of a cobbled courtyard and outbuildings, possibly a kitchen and a well, which would have served a great aisled hall sited next door to his house in the Gibsons. Dan finally managed to come through with a date for the Sampson post in the Gibsons' kitchen, and it was worth waiting for. His date of 1254 to 1299 places it nicely within the story of the developing Norman Newtown. The Time Team view is that this building could have been a guest hall used by visitors to Wenlock Priory. In fact, documents tell us that in 1231, King Henry III visited Much Wenlock, so it's possible that some of the king's entourage may have stayed here while he visited the priory. Finally, the pottery found in Jerry's garden and the pottery found at the bottom of the boundary dig are both of a similar date, that is, 12th to 13th century. This is good news because it bears out our theory that both were part of a planned development of the town, which started with Roger of Montgomery and the founding of the new Cluniac Priory in 1081. The beginnings of a process which would take Much Wenlock from a small Saxon settlement to a thriving medieval market town.